live on YouTube as well. So it's not showing the screen on YouTube. Let me make sure it's actually playing. Huh. Interesting. No one watches on YouTube anyway. Oh, there we go. It popped up. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk about important movies, pure Kino, the 100 most important movies for Rachel, as you put it. Before we do the Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we don't watch Rebel Moon for 2 weeks in a row. Actually, to be fair, I watched both sides of Rebel Moon, but Mango hasn't. So we're going to delay that for one more week because another interesting podcast topic came up. And it came up essentially sort of last night, but also sort of this weekend. So here's the backstory. On Thursday, I drove out to a cabin in the woods, a cabin in Big Bear, which, for those of you who don't know, Big Bear is just a lake in Southern California. It's about 2-3 hours from like Los Angeles. But it's like a pretty common. There's like skiing, snowboarding, right? But it's way up in the mountains, 8,000 feet up. So like, well, between 7,000 and 8,000. I don't know how many feet up, but super high up there, right? Big old sort of like, a friend of mine is getting married, so we went to his bachelor party. And while we were at the party, you know, these are a bunch of film people who all work in the industry, and so we were talking a lot about things. I was talking about Dune a lot because obviously Denis Villeneuve is my favorite director. You know, and I've been very Dune pilled sort of recently. I dropped some hot takes such as Dune has taken the Star Wars portion of my brain. I just haven't been thinking about Star Wars, and I have been thinking about Dune, this kind of stuff. And the more we had these kinds of conversations, the more Rachel sort of felt. Rachel, my partner, who everybody on the podcast knows and loves, I'm sure, was like, man, like what? I haven't seen like any of these movies. And when we got back yesterday, because we got back kind of in the middle of the afternoon, you know, we ended up watching Titanic. Okay, James Cameron's Titanic, because I love that movie. I think that movie is fantastic. It's amazing. Okay, and you know, she'd never seen it before. And at the end of it, she was like, you know, what you should do is you should come up with a list of like 100 movies that I should see and probably haven't seen, right? That we should watch together. And so now I'm sitting here thinking like, not what is the list of 100 movies, but like, how do you even approach the list, right? Because immediately I sort of started thinking about a million different sort of like, almost like methodologies to build this list out. And I thought that would make a pretty fucking fun podcast episode. So here we are talking about it. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I kind of want you to lay the ground rules for our criteria here, because I think there's a couple, like you said, I think there's a few ways you could go with this. I will say also that Rebel Moon might have to wait 2 weeks just because of the primary reason I haven't watched it is I don't have access to Netflix, and I need to figure out how to resolve that in the easiest way possible that doesn't involve me paying a bunch of extra money. So we will figure that out.
Sure. Is this because they like did the password thing, so you can't share with like your whole family anymore?
Yeah, no, my I have been using my parents' account, which is in New Jersey, for a very long time, and I do not have that. And my girlfriend will be moving in shortly, and she has an account. Like same thing happened to her, but she got like one of those subsidiary accounts, and so I have been resisting getting my own account because it's like, well, if I just wait 2 weeks, she'll have the account.
Okay, well, that's fine. Rebel Moon, yeah, can definitely wait 2 weeks. Okay, so here's some ground rules I'm thinking. I do want it to be a true list, but not numbered. So I'm not looking to make a top 100. I'm just thinking 100 any order, right? What are the one?
Yeah. Also, we're not getting through 100 in this episode, so it's like, you know.
Also, yes, and I'm also not trying to actually build the list in this episode. I don't want to come away from this episode with the 100 list, but I'm interested in like coming away with a methodology and like some examples. Like, what do you think should be on the list? What's a good way to approach the list, right? So, for instance, here's like a little piece of low hanging fruit. Something that I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, like Marvel movies, right? Rachel hasn't seen a bunch of the Marvel movies, but that's like pretty important to pop culture. But then I was like, man, I actually think that's probably not true, because if I were to say, okay, the Marvel movies are on this list, that's a quarter of the list, a third of the list, maybe, right? You know, I don't even know how many there are at this point.
Yeah,
right?
I think you could pick out a handful. right? Like, and have them be the important
Yeah, and
ones.
it's like yeah, maybe the Marvel Cinematic Universe has had an important impact on culture, right? But like it hasn't had such an impact on culture that including 30 movies on the list, it like there's no way that it per capita per movie, right? It's culture per movie. It's not at a high enough sort of like rate,
No,
but like maybe you could get a couple of them, right? And another thing I was thinking about, I was like, okay, well, what about directors, right? Maybe I just look at like the best directors, the most famous directors, right? And I'm like, okay, well, what are the Spielberg movies that I think that she should watch? What are, we should do the James Cameron movies, right? We should do Scorsese, we should do Coppola, right? We could do a million of these, right? We could do modern directors too, right? Denis Villeneuve, right? I
yeah.
mean, she's seen Dune, she's seen Sicario, obviously, because like I am hyper about these things, right? All these Zack Snyder movies or whatever, right? Anyway, and so I was just thinking, I was like, I don't know. So given that question, if you had to build a list of the top 100 movies, the most relevant movies to like popular culture, so that you could participate in conversations with cultured, nerd Kino people, right? What would be your method? How would you want to approach that list?
So how would I want to approach it? There's a couple things here, right? Like, I think your cultural impact thing is important. I think there's also a thing looking there for like things that are a little bit less obvious. The thing that like pops to my mind as like a thing that I saw on Twitter, right, is, somebody is like, I sat down and read the Bible, and like, the amount of things that are references to the Bible is staggering, right? It's like, if you want to understand a lot of Western literature, you should probably read the Bible, even if it's not like, spiritually meaningful to you,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think there's an aspect of that there, right? Like the one that popped into my mind when you said this was Seven Samurai, right? Famously your favorite movie. Um,
Yep. Which I
and
have
one that
also made her watch, actually.
yeah,
Funnily enough.
and when I watched because of you, right? I
Right. Yeah.
didn't watch it until I till like the late 2010s, I want to say. Um, and I watched it and I was like, oh, there are a bunch of things here, like, a bunch of references in Dark Souls that just like popped into my head. It's like, oh, this is where this comes from. So on the one hand, I think uh there are movies that are culturally significant. I think obviously you want to pull from a variety of cultures for that, although I think it's
Sure.
harder to do. I think film culture tends to be a little bit more segregated, right? So like uh but I think there are some markets that make sense, right? Like for whatever reason, uh, American and like Japanese movies, because I guess of like the obsession with anime, um, and also Japanese video games has a lot of crossover. So I'd probably like want to pick representative things from um, like maybe a film from Hayao Miyazaki, right? Like something like that. Um, but also in terms of directors, I think I'd want to pick the movie that is. Oh man, this is tough, right? Because I'm thinking like if I'm gonna pick a Wes Anderson movie, right, to understand Wes Andersonness, right? I think I pick the Grand Budapest Hotel because that is maybe
Yeah.
the most Wes Anderson movie that he has, even though it's maybe not like the biggest one or the one that people are
Yeah,
most
see,
familiar
this
with.
is my interesting. So, for instance, something that happened when I was at this like weekend thing is we were talking about when we were talking about Dune. I mentioned that Denis Villeneuve is my favorite director, and I told this story about Sicario. I watched Sicario. I actually watched Prisoners was the thing that turned me onto it. Prisoners turned me onto his upcoming movie Sicario, and then Sicario came out, and I thought it was so transcendently good that he immediately was like, "This guy is my jam. This is my favorite guy." But when I mentioned that, somebody was like, "Oh my god, I've seen Sicario. That was him," and I was like, "Yeah." And we were talking about some other stuff, right? And I just kind of had some of these like I don't know. I almost think of these as like baseline opinions about directors and actors. For instance, I said Jake Gyllenhaal is a good actor, right? And the way you can tell in a shit movie, Jake Gyllenhaal is good, right? He is good in everything, right? But a bad actor is only good in movies with good directors, right? So an example of this I was using was Chris Pratt. I think Chris Pratt's a pretty bad actor, but he's really good in Guardians of the Galaxy, right? He makes an excellent Star-Lord. James Gunn is an excellent director. The director elevates the actor in this, in kind
You,
of like this situation, right? And I feel like this sort of framework of opinions, right? It's the like, you have to like watch a bunch of different movies to like get these, right? And how do you form that? And it's like, and so that's where I was starting to think about directors. I was like, okay, how can I help somebody form an opinion about Steven Spielberg? What 3, 5 Steven Spielberg movies would I show them, right? How would I help somebody form an opinion about Tom Cruise, right? Do you like Tom Cruise? Have you seen Edge of Tomorrow, Mission Impossible 5, and Top Gun Maverick? Right? Is maybe like the stuff you would need to show someone to have them go, you know what? I like Tom Cruise. Or, you know what? Tom Cruise is overrated, right? Like that kind of stuff. And so, anyway, this is just like where my thought
yeah,
process is going.
so I think in my framework, I don't know if I would want to aim for any of those metrics that you're talking about, right? Like,
Oh,
you know,
interesting. Okay.
like putting a director on display or like I think those are separate lists, right? Like, if I want to evaluate Jake Gyllenhaal or Steven Spielberg or Roger Deakins as a cinematographer, right? Like I think I could put together lists of movies. Maybe I couldn't for those specific things, but I can understand putting together lists for those particular objectives. But I think in terms of like movies with impact, I don't think that should be the goal, right? Like, because I think you could have an incredibly impactful movie by like a no one director, and I think that's just as important as like like the film. The film of the filmography of Spielberg, right? Like
So an interesting example of this maybe would be John Wick, right?
yeah,
John Wick is such an important movie in hindsight, right? Like
yeah,
now in 2024, because it has inspired its own sort of subgenre. I would say it has changed the landscape of action movies kind of
I would agree.
forever, right? But it is also from a very pretty, no name. I mean, like at this point, Chad Stahelski and the other guy, David, whatever, have gone on to make a million other movies, right? More John Wick movies, but also, whatever, the Fast and Furious movie, the Hobbs and Shaw was Chad Stahelski, right? Deadpool 2, I think, was Chad Stahelski, this kind of stuff, right? I wouldn't say that Chad Stahelski belongs on that list, but I probably would say that John Wick belongs on that list, right?
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. The interesting thing is I feel like you have to have some level of net. I don't think you can have a list of 100 John Wicks, right? Because it doesn't have any sort of social web to it that allows for kind of the distillation of the I'm not like timelines, like through lines almost maybe of like the culture, right? That in order to, it's sort of like, you can draw an infinite number of lines through any individual point, but once you have 2 points, only one line can be drawn through those 2 points, right?
Right.
And I feel like you have to start grouping movies on your list of 100 to create some of those lines to show, I don't know.
Yeah, no, so
Yeah.
something that pops into my head here is like I think that like I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a very good movie. I don't think it's a movie I would pick for this list because
Oh, interesting.
I don't
Sure.
know how influential it is, right? Like it is like and maybe this goes against my Grand Budapest Hotel point, but like, you know, but like it is a very Tarantino movie, but it's kind of like the movie you see to be like, hey, that's a Tarantino movie. Whereas like if I was like trying to introduce someone new to Quentin Tarantino, I would pick probably Pulp Fiction, right? As kind of like the important movie, the one that's got a lot of references out in the real world, right? Um the one that had like the lasting cultural impact that let him build to the point where he made Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Um
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I also think that there are movies that are like very good that probably don't belong on this list, even if I love them and I would love to. For instance, Steven Soderbergh, director I love and would want to include on the list, right? But like there's no version of things where I include Magic Mike and Magic Mike XXL, but
or
do
like
over the Oceans movies, right? The Oceans movies are insane for a
yeah,
list like
I
this,
think you
right?
just do Ocean's 11, right? And you don't include like Danny Danger, whatever the Redneck Ocean's 11, which is a line they drop in that movie.
Oh yeah. I love that movie. God,
Yeah,
Logan
Lucky
Lucky.
Logan Lucky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that's a good movie. That was a fun movie. I would not include that on this list. I would
You know,
include.
it's interesting, but there are some, and this is part of the web. There are some movies. Maybe you could make a case for Logan Lucky for Adam Driver, right? Who, let's say, part of the list is about evaluating certain people in the culture, and you go, well, you know what? Maybe Logan Lucky isn't there for Soderbergh, but like Adam Driver has kind of become an acting
Sure,
force,
I think, but
in the culture.
if you're picking a movie to be like, this is a you know, let's say that like part of this culture that we're exploring is actors that have risen in personality, right? Like if I'm going to do an Adam Driver movie, I'm going to do probably what is Marriage Story is the name of it, right?
Well,
Like,
yeah, no, yeah, but sure. But this is the thing I'm getting at. That's interesting. Maybe individually, I would put Marriage Story for Adam Driver, and I would put Ocean's 11 for like Steven Soderbergh, right? But maybe there's a version of things where you go, you know what? Logan Lucky is a Steven Soderbergh movie with Adam Driver, and the two of them together, it may and actually, and Channing Tatum, right? And Channing Tatum is also a guy that is like important to the culture. And like you start making these kind of bundles where actually there's some hidden gems where there's a bunch of different people who kind of cross paths in this movie and represent a thing. And even though it doesn't seem like it should be on the list, it should be on the list. That would be my argument for Logan Lucky, which is a little bit of like me steel manning a bad idea.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say like I could see that being true for certain movies. I don't think that's true for Logan Lucky, right? Like if you wanted to be like, well, I want to be efficient because I've got like 100 slots and I don't want to waste them, right? I could see that working for what is it? Dune? What's not Dune?
Dune would actually be a pretty good one. Dune has a lot of people.
So I'm sure that would work, right? But Blade Runner 2042, right?
Oh, sure.
That's Denny, that's Gosling, that's Dave Bautista, right? Like weirdly, right?
It is a like long after sequel of which there are a million of these, right? A movie from the 80s that got a sequel in the 2010s kind of thing. Yeah, that's real. You could maybe make that happen.
No, I think I would put Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2042 on the list, and like probably like maybe the only one with like that kind of like time gap sequelness to it.
God, yeah, maybe.
Like I think the original Blade
I would maybe go for Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, I think, actually.
Okay.
I was making this argument that Top Gun is Tony Scott, right? Do you know offhand?
I don't.
Ridley Scott's brother. I'm pretty sure it's Tony Scott. See, because like Top Gun and Top Gun the interesting thing that I like about this is Top Gun is, I think, a very important, like, influential movie. There's a million references to Top Gun all over the place, right? Top Gun Maverick came out 2 years ago, was huge, huge movie. It's the #1 movie in America kind of thing. But the original Top Gun sucks. It's not a good movie. Like, nothing happens in it, and I think that there's like a lot of interesting kind of like stuff you could get from there. And sure. I bet that there's a couple of other opportunities you could find that sort of like that have parallel sort of paths like that, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there's also like, I think once you build this, there's also the opportunity like kind of like building connections, because like in my mind, movie we already talked about, John Wick, also a movie that will definitely be on this list, is the original Matrix, right? You and I both like the sequel Matrix,
but I would never put them on here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. But then you get, Keanu Reeves across time, right? Like, and I don't think I'd put any other Keanu movie on the list, but I'm not familiar enough with like, what would it be, like Point Break, right? Like, the older stuff. Although
Point Break is great. I would maybe put Point Break on the list. I probably wouldn't put Point Break on the list. Yeah. The Matrix and John Wick are so insane, right? That like it would be hard to justify a third Keanu Reeves picture. But if it would have to be Point Break, I feel like. Maybe Bill and Ted's, if you really wanted to.
Yeah, Bill and Ted. Route. Bill. I mean, talking about like your framework, your Bill and Ted's also pulls in, George Carlin, right? Like, because
George Carlin's pretty much. Do you think George Carlin's big enough to make the list? Is he that like? Is he
as an actor? So for instance, as an actor, I think you're right. Maybe not.
Yeah, like I was thinking about who are some directors that I like or I think are interesting, but I wouldn't make the list. Like Kevin Smith would be an example of this. Kevin Smith, I actually think is pretty important to the culture, and he had a real swell. But like at this point, at this point in the culture, he's kind of nothing, right?
I don't. I think
And
Clerks.
isn't
If I was gonna put a Kevin Smith movie, it'd be Clerks, and I think there's a strong argument for it.
you think there's a strong I think there's a strong argument that Clerks isn't good enough because Kevin Smith himself and there's nobody else in that movie is and it's so irrelevant that you might as well just cut it from the list, right?
Yeah, maybe.
It is only there for Kevin Smith. Nobody else is in that movie, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like something from like that set of movies, maybe Dogma then. But I think that's like
Yeah, I
impactful
thought when
enough
you
on
get
the
Ben
culture.
Affleck, Matt Damon, that's huge, right?
Yeah,
That's George Carlin too, right?
yeah,
Yeah, you can maybe okay, you can maybe convince me to put Dogma on the list.
yeah,
Chris Rock is on that. Man, Dogma actually kind of
yeah.
had
No,
it. Selma
Dogma's.
Hayek is in that.
Yeah, this is like, you know, this is like one of those things where like there are a lot of movies with a lot of critical acclaim that are very good, but like don't necessarily stand the test of time. And ones that
Yeah.
are like I think are like kind of weird, but like like The Fifth Element, right? Like this is because when you say Chris Rock, I thought of it's not obviously not Chris
Chris
Rock.
Tucker, yeah,
Yeah,
Rush Hour, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Rush Hour, like Rush Hour is like impactful enough that like a line from the outtakes of Rush Hour 2 is like a thing that regularly gets that gets referenced in like in the culture.
What's that?
Damn, he's not going to make it back for Rush Hour 3, right? Like that gets but like, Donkey references that, right? Like I've heard it like a thousand different places, right? Like
Yeah.
and like Jackie Chan's an important person, right? Although he's kind of fallen off a lot, right? Like
Yeah. How much do you think about like hmm. Dogma is a great example of the Logan Lucky I think I was thinking about. The
yeah.
lesser known movie, everybody would think of Clerks, but I think the lesser known movie would be a better movie to feature
Yeah.
Kevin Smith just because it bundles a bunch of extra stuff in there.
Also, I think
Right,
it's a
in the
better
right
movie.
way.
Everything considered.
Listen, I know Jackie Chan. I watched so much of the animated Jackie Chan adventures. Fair enough. Okay, the bunny, the talismans. That's cool as hell. Okay, what a what a what a TV show on WB Kids. Yeah. How much do you think of like movie studios matters? Like Warner Brothers versus Disney versus like whatever, right? Like at a certain level, I feel like part of that is like you got to have a Pixar movie,
Yeah,
right?
I would say basically not at all, with the exception of like maybe Disney and Pixar, right?
Oh,
Like,
really?
um,
Maybe interesting. Okay.
yeah, and like there are very few movies I'm picking because it's representative of a studio. Um, like I like if we're picking any Marvel movies, it's not because not because they're Disney movies, but because they're cultural forces unto themselves. I think maybe like a golden age of animation Disney film is needs to be on the list for that kind of reason.
God, man, that's super interesting. Yeah, because part of this is that like I'm kind of coming at this from this frame of I want to help somebody form opinions about the culture, right? And part of our opinions about the culture can come down to stuff like Disney, WB, right? Like David Zaslav, right? Like what does a WB movie like look like? That's something that would be people talk about on like film Twitter or something, right? But like that's too esoteric. You can't fit
Yeah,
that on the list.
yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I wonder how much it like in the chat, Rachel says what that goes into that kind of goes into what about genre, especially going back in history. And this isn't directly about that, but the thing that pinged in my head is like how much is like our list going to be shaped by the fact that like we grew up on Disney films, pretty much. Like
Yeah.
I assume you did, I did, right? Like like you need Representative Spaghetti Western, for example. Maybe, and I think the answer there is just the good, the bad, and the ugly. But like also that's
Yeah.
like before our time in a lot of
And
ways,
also, I
right?
think the farther back you go, the worse and harder it gets to. It is very hard for me to make in this day and age a an argument that you should go pretty far back in time. I'm sorry to phrase this another way. I think the farther back in time you go, the more you lose in terms of sort of this multifaceted power, right? Of like bundling a bunch of things together, right? Um, and the more likely it is that you will find a modern version of the thing from the past that does enough and also that like and also does more. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a pretty good example. I don't know that there's like another Western that I would want to like go that far back for, but I think I would make the argument that you don't include The Godfather and you do include The Departed or like Goodfellas or something, right? You say you need a mafia movie. The Godfather's a one of the best movies of all time. Sure, whatever, right? But like at the end of the day, Goodfellas does all that stuff and more, right? Or, The Departed does all of that stuff and you got Leonardo on his right break into prestige acting, right? You've got Martin Scorsese. It's obviously a Martin Scorsese movie. You've got Jack Nicholson, right? In like one of his sort of career defining performances, all this other sort of stuff. I think that's pretty interesting. Like when
But he says, "Don't watch Citizen Kane. It's dumb and irrelevant." That's actually, I think, an important question. Do you put Citizen Kane on the list?
I don't think I would put Citizen Kane on the list. I don't think it comes up enough. It doesn't justify its spot. I mean, like who talks about Orson Welles in a modern conversation about popular culture? Probably nobody.
I don't, I don't know if that's true. I think I like there is enough influence there that I think that something from Orson Welles wants to be
Interesting.
there. I don't know if it needs to be Citizen Kane. I mean, I think if I have to, maybe that's the one I go for. But like, you know, if you know, there's this sense that like, if I'm doing this, I want to put it together for somebody so that when they see like a reference on Twitter, they get it, right? Like it's kind of like a baseline here. And like something that comes up a lot is that film or that clip from The Critic where Orson Welles is eating peas, right? Like, right? Like, and you need something there, right? Like, but there's so much there that I actually don't think you can just get that across with one of his dramatic movies. You also need kind of like something that demonstrates the kind of fall there as well, right? Like same thing with like what is it, Marlon Brando, right? Like I don't want to do like two movies, one of him in his prime and like what's the one like the one where he's like a doctor that like turns people into animals or something.
Oh yeah, the Dr. Moreau.
Dr. Moreau, yeah. The famously bad movie, right? Like I don't think I want to dedicate two whole slots for 2% of the list just to show that, but like Brando's important, right? Like,
man, that's really interesting. I feel like there's a difference between being important to film history and being important to like film culture in a way. And I think I may be making the argument that you can disinvite Orson Welles and Marlon Brando just because it's been so long. Maybe you could get me to put Brando on the list for The Godfather because The Godfather, as much as I just made that example, that like you get a better mob movie with like The Departed or whatever, like you could maybe convince me that Coppola plus Brando plus mafia movie plus sort of like the like the Hollywood New Age. That's a pretty potent combination. You can maybe get me to put Godfather on the list for that. I think I'd actually put Godfather Part 2 on the list because you also get Robert De Niro in Godfather Part 2 and Al Pacino. Jesus. You could get me to put Godfather 2 on the list. Well, I guess Brando isn't in Godfather 2, so.
Yeah. I mean, this is a tough thing to do, right?
Yeah, this is such a tough thing to do, especially because I feel what I actually want to do is I want to create an incredibly complicated list of criteria and then like feed it into an AI or something to like have it spit out a list that like maximizes for all of these things.
Yeah.
You have to watch The Godfather to watch Godfather 2. See, I generally don't think you can respect the sequel rule in this list of 100 movies.
Yeah.
Because you just don't have the real estate for that.
Yeah, I think you can I think that's an acceptable cheat, right? Like putting one movie in the list that doesn't like or a couple movies in the list that like have prequels that theoretically you'd want to watch beforehand, but like they themselves don't make the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like we were talking about historical movies. I'm like, well, I've just recently something popped in my head about Gene Wilder. It's like, do I care enough about Gene Wilder to put him in the list? It's like, well, I could do Blazing Saddles, right, as like indicative of kind of like that type of screwball comedy. It gets you Mel Brooks, it gets you Gene Wilder.
Yeah, Mel Brooks is huge, right?
Yeah. and like the other contenders there are like History of the World Part 1, I guess. But like I also don't think that that's as impactful, right? Like
I
do
mean,
we
you wouldn't put Spaceballs on the list? Spaceballs, I think, could maybe get there.
Yeah, I guess Spaceballs could get there. This is
You have
actually
Rick Moranis, you have John Candy, right?
well this is an interesting thing. Uh how many Star Wars do you put on the list? In my mind, my immediate reaction was 4, 5, and 6, and that's it. Right? Like
I don't think I put all of them on the list. I think I put one. I think I put Star Wars 1, and I think I put Revenge of the Sith on the list.
I
I
disagree.
feel like you have to include one thing from the prequels. They're so huge. It's like you put Lord of the Rings on the list, but you only put Fellowship probably on the list.
I don't know. First of all, I don't. I don't like. I love the prequels. You know I do. I just don't think
Yeah.
they're worth a slot.
You don't think they're part of? I feel like they're a very important part of our culture.
Hmm.
But that's yeah. I mean, that's an interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, maybe.
Because what do you get out of Empire that you don't get out of the original Star Wars? Right?
Well, having
Aren't
the best
they,
movie of
aren't
all time
they,
on the list, of course.
I mean, maybe sure, maybe
Yeah,
you
no,
say,
but like,
like
I think Empire.
the overlap is so stark there, right? But if you put two Star Wars movies on the list, you get quite a lot with both the prequel and Revenge of the Sith and with
Yeah.
Empire, right? Versus if I'm only putting,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean, I could see an argument for swapping Return of the Jedi for Revenge of the Sith, but I still think I'd put 4, 5, and like 4 and 5 on there. Like, because I think there is something
Okay,
important
interesting.
to there being like movies that are representative of kind of sequels, right? Like like sequels as a thing, right? Like how much of the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy do you put on this? I don't think you put more than one in there, but like.
True.
I do think like movies with sequels is an important enough thing, right? And for me, that naturally goes to Star Wars, but I think you can make an argument for what like Terminator, Aliens, what other movies are kind of in this, you know, 80s to 90s, tons of like movies in a series that don't go super far like we have in the modern age, but like have enough kind of for like Ghostbusters, right? Like Ghostbusters 1 and 2 are good, right? Like I think Ghostbusters 1 probably gets on this list. 2
You
is
gotta
much
have
more
something.
debatable.
Well, man, oh god, because I feel like I would want to do. There's a lot of good Bill Murray kind of Harold Ramis stuff, right? You could do. So my first thought was Groundhog Day, right? You can do
Yeah,
Groundhog Day.
yeah.
If you want to do Bill Murray, but maybe Ghostbusters is better. I like Groundhog Day better than I like. Yeah.
Ghostbusters. But
What I'm hearing is no to the Godfather, but yes to Raimi Spider-Man. This is true. I would say, yeah, I think Spider-Man 2 incredibly important, absolutely on the list, right? That's not even a question to me that
yeah,
Spider-Man 2 is on the
I
list.
think there's a very strong argument for both Groundhog Day and Ghostbusters 1,
Yeah.
right? Um uh just because like they are such important movies, right? Like
Yeah.
um
What's the Dan Aykroyd? But then also, who's the guy that he always is with in the other movie? Do you know what I'm
oh,
talking about?
Steve Martin is his no, that's not John Aykroyd. That's I'm thinking of somebody. I'm thinking of the other person for
I'm
like
thinking
these
of John
roles.
Belushi is who I think.
Belushi, yeah, Blues
Yeah.
Brothers.
You have to do Blues Brothers is
Brothers.
exactly what I was thinking.
I was thinking about that
You
earlier,
have to
right?
do John Belushi somewhere in here, probably like Animal House, right?
Yeah.
How much? Okay, here's a really, really interesting question. How much does a historical movie about movie making cover itself? So, for instance, in 2015 or so, a movie came out called shit. I don't remember what it was called. It's like a stupid. What was it? Stupid gesture. A futile and stupid gesture. Okay, this was a biopic of Doug Kenny, who was one of the co-founders of National Lampoon, right? And it stars Will Forte. It actually stars a lot of like the modern kind of SNL generation, right? Will Forte, Domhnall Gleeson, Joel McHale is in there as Chevy Chase. You just had a million. You had a million people, right? It is a movie about movies, essentially. How much do you feel like you could get away with by including this relatively unknown futile and stupid gesture in order to cover that whole period of movies? Do you save all of those movies? You save Animal House, Caddyshack, right? Ghostbusters, right? Like all of those movies just by using futile and stupid gesture.
I don't think I can do that like at all.
Okay, interesting.
I'd say if I wanted to cover specifically National Lampoon, I'd pick like Christmas or Family Vacation and be done with it there, right? Like I think that handles a lot. Um, Probably Christmas, just because it's like important enough, right? Like this is also like there's also kind of like a whole thing in here that is like, you know, how much, how important are like movies that wouldn't be important, but for the fact that they are associated with like, this is basically I'm saying movies that wouldn't be important, but for the fact that they're Christmas movies, right? Like A Christmas Story is a movie that like is very near and dear to my heart. I think it has a lot of influence in a lot of places, right? Like like you shoot your eye out, kid, that kind of thing, right? I don't know if push came to shove if I'd include it on the list, but like if you were like telling me, throw a bunch of stuff on the board and we'll pare it down to 100, I think I'd throw that in there. And maybe it gets
Yeah,
pared
that's true.
down.
You
But
probably get a billion of those, right? You get like the Santa Claus, right?
right,
The Tim
yeah,
Allen movie. Um, Honestly, I think I could maybe make the argument that the Santa Claus belongs on the list. It
yeah,
was the 90s are a very hard decade to cover in like popular culture, right? The 80s kind of has a vibe, right? Like the 60s has a vibe, right? But I feel like the 90s has a vibe that we haven't kind of as a like we just haven't like pinned it down. But I think a real vibe to the nature of movies in the 90s was movies that had pitches quite like the Santa Claus, right? These sort of I don't know, man, what would I sort of call these like kinds of movies? They're just sort of these like movies that remix and like categorize some of these pop culture institutions, right? So for instance, another good example of this, which is in a totally different vein, but attacks the exact same thing that I'm trying to explain about like the weird culture of movie making in the 90s would be Independence Day, right?
yeah,
Because Independence Day is like the 90s version of this alien invasion story, right?
right,
But
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like huge and it's 90s. It's got Will Smith, he's doing quips or whatever. And I feel like what Independence Day is doing to alien invasion movies, the Santa Claus is doing to Christmas movies. Does that make sense?
yeah. No, I totally get that. Yeah, yeah,
Plus, I think Tim Allen, like there's a bunch, Tim Allen,
right.
Jonathan Taylor Thomas, there's a bunch of stuff in there that you could get, the nature of the Santa Claus as like a movie that introduces like very hard lore and world building is also a pretty like, man, I'm making a pretty good case for myself that I want to put the
Yeah,
Santa
yeah.
Claus on the list. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think you should put any of the sequels in, but like, as the thing that like creates, a sprawling kind of deal, right? Like, even if a lot of them are like kind of direct to DVD type sequels or like fodder for children that no one sees besides, parents and boards kids, right? Like, um,
Honestly, a wild choice. I mean, yeah, listen, I don't know. There was a while where Tim Allen was huge. He was in a
yeah,
lot of things. Yeah.
I mean, Tim Allen is still not nobody, right? Like,
Yep.
different.
He's, the voice of Buzz
Oh
Lightyear, all
man,
the rest of it. Yeah.
we put Galaxy Quest in, right? Well,
Ooh. Oh, Galaxy Quest I would make my list. I think 1,000,000% because it's got great crossover on a million different people. You've got Sam Rockwell, you've got Justin Long, you've got not Susan Sarandon. What the fuck is her name? Sigourney Weaver. You've got Tim Allen, and you've got I see he's Snape in Harry Potter. What the
yeah,
fuck
yeah,
is his
no. I was like, it's not
Alan
Leonard
Rickman?
Nimoy. It's the guy who plays
Yeah,
Leonard Nimoy character.
yeah, like you just it has this most insane overlap with a million different, and I think that all of those would be great. Plus, like just like the way that it approach, it was funny. Galaxy Quest actually trumps Santa Claus in my mind because I think Galaxy Quest also attacks this thing because like the Galaxy Quest is doing towards space operas what Santa Claus is doing to Christmas movies, right? It like Galaxy Quest is to Star Trek as whatever, the Santa Claus is to
Uh,
Miracle on 34th Street, that
yeah,
kind
yeah,
of thing.
or like A Christmas Carol, right? Like, uh,
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
oh
okay, what are
man,
some dark horse picks? Like, what do you have any picks that you would be like, you would never think this is a good movie, but I'm gonna make a really great argument. It's this.
uh, I'm sorry, but the discussion just like set my mind in the direction of like, do I put like Muppet Christmas Carol or Muppet Treasure Island on this list? um, uh,
You gotta have something. You gotta have something with the Muppets. The Muppets are pretty big.
yeah.
Muppets are
So
pretty huge.
I feel like again, if we throw all these down and we start constructing this list, it's like I think we need a Christmas movie, and if we eliminate, the Santa Claus for Galaxy Quest, then I go with a Muppet Christmas Carol, right? But if we don't, then I pick Muppet Treasure Island, right? Like,
I don't think you have any Tim Curry. That's true. Tim Curry is a big boy. Okay.
oh man, do you put fucking Rocky Horror Picture Show
Rocky
on there?
Horror. Oh my God.
You
No
put The Room
way.
on this list, right? Like,
Yeah, I probably put the room on the list.
yeah.
Yes. You have to. You maybe put Neil Breen.
I don't
Um.
know. I feel like Neil Breed's a little too inside, right? Like, I feel
So
like
that's yeah, that's
I
true. The
feel like
room is
of
yeah.
this kind of like world of like bad movies that are watched for fun, The Room's the movie for that, right? Like,
You know what? Actually, I would maybe put the room, and I would also put what's that Making of the Room movie called? Do you remember what that movie was
oh,
called with James
Disaster
Franco?
Artist, The Disaster Artist.
Yeah, the Disaster Artist. Disaster Artist has 1 million people, and it's great to hit kind of the Judd Apatow, like you could maybe bookmark that era of comedy. You go 40-year-old virgin on one end, you'd go the Disaster Artist on the other end, and then you also tie in the Disaster Artist to the Room on this whole other realm. And you also have movies about making movies, which is sort of what I was getting at when it came to the Feudal and Super
Yeah.
Gesture. I would maybe put Disaster Artist on
The
the
thing
list.
is, I don't think The Disaster Artist is good enough to make the list, right? Like,
Really? Okay. But like
yeah,
I feel like I have to have like a Seth Rogen, James Franco,
yeah,
whatever era movie in there. And Disaster Artist having that
yeah.
very tempting.
Oh man.
There's so much stuff on the list that I would
So
want to cover.
I've got a pitch for a movie that maybe you wouldn't immediately think of, and it's Hot
Okay,
Rod.
sure, hit me.
It's Hot Rod.
Oh man.
Because
That's
like
yeah.
The Lonely Island as representative of kind of like that late aughts, early tens kind of humor. Is just like it's too perfect for that. You get Sandberg, you get Chris Parnell, you get who's the
Will
dad?
Arnett.
Will
You
Arnett,
get Ian McShane.
Ian McShane, right? Like, you just get so much out of that movie, right? Like,
It's true. I feel like I could make a real case that Pop Star Never Stop Never Stopping is
yeah.
better than Hot Rod.
I think it's maybe a better movie, but I don't think it's.
No, I'm saying better for the list than Hot Rod.
Yeah,
Just because it had, like they had real crossover with like 1 million, you know what I mean? But like
I also feel like it didn't have the impact that Hot Rod did,
it
right?
definitely didn't have the impact. That's true. It definitely did not have the impact that Hot Rod did, and that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like what's like there's like
Bill
the
Hader's in that movie. God, Hot Rod is so good.
I was like the number of people who will recognize Cool Beans over like Kill Your Parents or whatever the song is from
Yeah.
Pop Star, right? Like it's just like too big, right? I think Hot Rod, like I love Pop Star, right? Like, but
Okay, here's the question. I want to pose a hypothetical. Step Brothers or Walk Hard?
ooh,
I feel like you have to do something from this like John C. Riley, Will Ferrell oeuvre, right? Talladega Nights, Anchorman maybe would be in here, right? But I think the best of all of those movies is Walk Hard. It's such a good movie, and it is lambasting all of these other movies that were coming out right at the exact same time. But you lose Will Ferrell, who's like
yeah.
key to this whole thing working.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could make the argument for both Walk Hard and Anchorman, right? Because Anchorman also gets you like Paul Rudd, right? Like, oh man, do I want to put like kind of like what is the other sketch comedy group, right? The one that did Wet Hot American Summer, and
Wet Hot American Summer is
yeah.
1,000% on the list. It has to be because it is. I think I wouldn't include Anchorman. I think I would include 40-Year-Old Virgin from that line, and I would just get rid. And I would say, well, and I would probably put Step Brothers. This is what I was thinking. I was thinking I would do 40-Year-Old Virgin. You do Step Brothers because Step Brothers is Will
Wolf.
Ferrell, John C. Riley, but a bunch of other people, and then 40-Year-Old Virgin is like Paul Rudd, it's Seth Rogen, it's Steve Carell, right? Whatever. But the real reason that I would want to include 40 Virgin is because it has all of these guys, I think, at their core. All you need to do is watch 40-Year-Old Virgin and you understand Seth Rogen, right? And he's just a supporting character, right?
Yeah.
In that, right, like in that movie or whatever. And I think that principle is so true for Wet Hot American Summer. If you watch Wet Hot American Summer, you understand like like Amy Poehler, you understand God, what's her name? Janine Garofalo,
Yeah,
right? David Hyde Pierce is in that, right? Like
Fred
God,
Armisen
there's so
is in
many
there,
people.
right? Like he has to be, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Like essentially the entire cast of what's the police show that I can't remember off the top of my head. The one with Andy Samberg.
99.
Yeah, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Yeah.
Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, God, Wet Hot American Summer, absolutely on the list. Fuck, God, that movie is so good.
I don't know.
And
part of me wants to say that like I put Anchorman in over 40-Year-Old Virgin.
Okay.
Again, just because it's like it's so impactful, right? Like
honestly, I think part of it is that I personally don't like Anchorman that much, and I don't think it's that funny. And I think Step Brothers is like insanely fucking funny. And
I think I agree with you on the merits, but I think in terms of like the impact, right? Like,
yeah,
right. Like, do we put a Harry Potter movie on this list? Right? We probably should.
Yeah, see,
I didn't watch any of them, right? Like,
this is actually, I would probably say this would be a controversial opinion in the opposite direction, right? In the way that something like Hot Rod belongs on the list and in a dark horse way, I think Harry Potter and maybe Pirates of the Caribbean. You know what I mean? There are some movies, big franchise movies, that I just say skip them.
I don't know. I think Harry Potter's too big. I think.
Wow. Okay.
I think we're at like a little bit of the wrong age because we could skip the movies because we grew up with the books.
Sure.
But I think they are like a lot of people's primary exposure to that thing, which is way too culturally important, unfortunately.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's true. You would have to include the Hunger Games, right? Because you have to have Jennifer Lawrence and you have to have teenage YA, dystopia in there, right? Because it's such a huge genre. There's a million of these movies, right? And the most important of them is probably going to be Jennifer Lawrence.
But what about Twilight?
That's good. Ask ContraPoints. I want to answer this question. How useful do you think it would be to look back on previous award seasons to remind yourself of potential items, or do you think that it can that if you can't think of it, it's probably not relevant enough? I actually do think I would want to look at. Two things. Here are two lists I was thinking of going through year by year. One, top 10 box office. Two, Oscars.
Best Picture nominees.
Yeah, essentially best picture. But like I would probably open it up a little bit. Like, so for instance, something like you could maybe convince me of like a weird, I'm trying to think what's because this would be a bad example, but Dallas Buyers Club is what Matthew McConaughey and Jared Leto both won Oscars for. It wasn't nominated for Best Picture. It was absolutely an Oscar vehicle, and it was like tailor-made to make these two guys to get these two guys Best Picture. I would probably look at all that, right? Just to any of these, whatever superstar vehicle movies that are about, okay, this is just to get, big name actor their Oscar win.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I think in general, it's also important to think about. Or like it's important to think about like what we are doing this for, right? Is it to engage people in film culture? In that case, I think the Academy Awards are more important. If it's to like how the general culture interfaces with movie, I think they're less important, right? Like if it's the former, then I think Parasite makes the list. If it's the latter, controversially, I'm going to say it doesn't, because I think that's like largely forgotten at this point, right? Like, I don't think it's a bad movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I just don't think it's, in the consciousness as much.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just gonna take a quick look at some of the stuff that I like see on the, like the best picture winners lists. Man, I really fucking forgot about some of these movies. Do you know that Nomadland really won Best Picture in 2020?
Yeah,
Fuck.
I mean, it's been
I
weird
mean,
at the
yeah,
Academy.
Chloe Zhao.
I also think that this is another controversial thing. I think the awards are more useful further back than they are in the more recent years. Um, like, I think
Yeah.
there's um uh too much hand wringing over um secondary considerations in like the very modern era. Uh
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, God, man, now that I'm like looking at this, like, okay, let me just read list of Oscar nominees, right? So you've got The Shape of Water, Call Me by Your Name, Darkest Hour, Dunkirk, Get Out, Lady Bird, Phantom Thread, The Post, Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, right? That list of Oscar nominees, I feel like I could make a good case for at least some of these, right? You could say Dunkirk is the quintessential Nolan movie,
yeah.
right? You could say, The Shape of Water is the quintessential Del Toro movie, right? Get Out obviously is. I don't think if I were to include Jordan Peterson on the list, I'm including Get Out, right?
Not the Jordan
Oh, I'm sorry, not
not Jordan
what
Peterson.
is Jordan Peele. Jordan Peterson. You know what? It is a movie about white people taking over black people's jobs, and I bet Jordan Peterson would go for that, but in the opposite way, right? And it's pretty interesting. This is all pretty interesting. Even something like The Post, right? Like The Post is a Meryl Streep, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg picture, right? That
Yeah,
like
but
maybe you could make a weird dark horse argument that like actually The Post should probably be somewhere,
but
in
so I,
this.
I think a lot of these movies fall into the kind of thing I was talking about why I wouldn't put Once Upon a Time in Hollywood on the list, right?
Sure.
Like I don't think I put The Post on the list. I think Get Out is a strong argument. But I don't think I put Shape of Water on the list. I think I put Hellboy on the
Yeah.
list before Shape of Water, and I don't think I put there was another one in there that like pinged me for like another movie that was more that I think was strong. What were the movies you just listed off? Sorry.
It was Shape of Water, Call Me by Your Name, Darkest Hour, Dunkirk, Get Out,
Oh
Lady
yeah,
Bird.
Dunkirk. I would put Dark Knight. Dark Knight 100%, right? Like that has to be on the list, I think, right? Like it ushers in
Oh,
an entire
yeah. I
era.
mean, yeah, Jesus Christ. It covers Christian Bale, Heath
Yeah.
Ledger, right?
Yeah.
Man, and it's yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean that's pretty fair.
Yeah. I mean,
Um
not that necessarily I strike Dunkirk from the list, but I also don't like I also don't.
I think there are definitely some people who could get two on the list. I could easily make an argument. You
Pan's
probably
Labyrinth for Del
want.
Toro. I think that's a good call. Sorry.
Oh yeah, Pan's Labyrinth is the
Yeah.
correct choice for Del Toro. Man, not Hellboy.
I think I like Hellboy, but like it's a little too niche. I think like
Wait, hold on. Hellboy is more niche than Pan's Labyrinth.
too niche and also
Pan's
doesn't.
Labyrinth.
No, so
Pan's,
it's
okay.
Hellboy. So here, let me elaborate.
Okay.
It is too niche without having the artistic merit that Pan's Labyrinth brings. Is what I'm gonna say.
Boy, yeah, I mean, maybe.
Like
My thinking is something I maybe would actually make the argument for Pacific Rim. There we go. I think
Pacific
if
Rim
I'm
1?
including a
Yeah.
Del Toro movie, I would maybe go Pacific Rim because even though like Charlie Hunnam didn't really like go anywhere or like any of the sort of stuff, right? It is a perfect Del Toro movie. It's got Idris Elba who's really into it, and honestly,
And
it's
Charlie
just
Day.
like yeah, that's true. Charlie Day. It's got I don't know. It's just got like the right vibes. I think Hellboy is already just going to be covered by like a bunch of other comic book movies. You know what? That's pretty fair. That's pretty fair.
Does Sonic make the list?
Yeah. Does the Super Mario Brothers movie make the list?
I
As like
I think Sonic makes it over Mario, right? Like Because I think you're gonna get Pratt through like Guardians. Like I think Guardians 1 is on the list, right? Like
Oh, true. I mean, if you're doing Marvel, what are your picks for Marvel? You have to put Marvel on the list to some degree.
so
What are your Marvel movies? How do you get the most out of that whole gigantic package?
again, so like this is my gut. Things they throw in the bucket before it gets pared down are Iron Man, Avengers, and then Endgame. Are like the three kind of like ones that like really stick out to me. Um and Guardians and Guardians.
I think I include Avengers 2 over Avengers 1 because you just get more bang for your buck. You get everything you got in Avengers 1, but you get a bunch of extra stuff, right?
Okay, I think that's fair.
Because there's more. You get the the Scarlet Witch is in there, obviously. And then it set up all that other stuff. Actually, you know what? You know what I would do? Civil War. Because Civil War is even more than Avengers 2. You get Spider-Man, you get Tom Holland Spider-Man, you get Black Panther, you get Chadwick Boseman. Wow. I think Civil War is the answer.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, there's something to me that like the original Avengers has kind of like the original Avengers has kind of like a, most ambitious crossover event, right? Like, like the meme, right?
You know what's funny? I think actually Fast 5. You include Fast 5 and that covers ambitious early to 2010s super crossover event. Yeah.
What is the crossover in Fast 5?
It pulls all the other all the other characters from the other Fast and Furious movies.
Yeah, but they're like, I don't know. It's like that doesn't feel like a real crossover to me, right? That feels.
Fast and Furious has to be on the list, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. What Fast and Furious movie do you put on the list?
I mean, so I think 5 or 6, but not because it's an ambitious crossover, right?
Okay. Okay. I think I put on. I think it's got to be 5 or 9. You could give me the argument that 9. It's got to be 5. There's no way that it's 9. I mean, I love 9. I think 9 is, is amazing. But you lose Paul Walker.
What's the one with the Paul Walker dying? The Paul Walker drives away scene.
That's 7. You could get me to 7 because Jason Statham is the villain in 7.
Oh yeah, right. And
that's huge, right? Like,
no, but like it doesn't get crazier than the tank or the airplane. Like I think you need the tank or the airplane, right, to like really get the soul of that, right?
The tank. What? Well, hold on. The tank and the airplane are both in 6.
Are they? All right.
5 is the safes.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Fighting around the city.
Yeah.
Which I think is great.
No,
and the other thing I love about 5 is the introduction of The Rock. And I think if you are covering The Rock, you have to cover The Rock. This is the other reason why 9 doesn't make the list. There's no The Rock and there's no Paul Walker, right? God, man.
There's a part of me that also wants to say Tokyo Drift, but that's like as a standalone. That's like not as a Fast and the Furious candidate.
It would be so hard to get me to put Tokyo Drift on the list because it has so little interaction with anything else besides.
My gut would say I would throw Tokyo Drift in the pile as like an independent cultural influence, and it probably gets paired out at some point, right? Like,
yeah, probably. Yeah, I think I agree with you. What would you do for the DCEU?
The Watchmen. That's it. Like I know that's not. I know that's not quite the right answer.
Like you have to put Batman vs Superman on the list. Even if you hate it, everybody knows Batman vs Superman. Everybody makes Martha references, and you have to include Zack Snyder somewhere, right?
Well, that's why I was saying The Watchmen, right? Like,
it's fair. Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
but just because like I think The Watchmen's actually good, right? Like,
true. I mean, The Watchmen is interesting. The thing I would really like about including The Watchmen, I probably would want to include Watchmen, is it has no super huge like big name AAA star, but a million people who have been in a million things and kind of deserve to be featured at least like somewhere. Like Billy Crudup is in so many things. He's like a pretty important actor. Patrick Wilson, another good example. He's in a million things. He's just in so many things, right? And you just tick him off the list.
Yeah,
I mean, so like with something like Watchmen,
I feel like I could, if it was the representative for like the kind of standard for the DCEU and Zack Snyder, I think I'd do Watchmen. If we did Batman versus Superman, maybe I would eliminate the Watchmen and put in 300. Because that's also
Okay.
important. But like like
I mean, 300 is more important. 300 is like Zack Snyder is actually weirdly important, I think, to the list because there are a lot of people who built their careers out of Zack Snyder films. Michael Fassbender came out of Zack Snyder. Oscar Isaac came out of Zack Snyder, right? Like their first film roles were in Zack Snyder movies. He cast them, right? Jason Momoa, right? For Aquaman, right? Like the person who broke him into essentially mainstream acting was Zack Snyder casting him as Aquaman. Gal Gadot, same thing, right? Gal Gadot is like a huge fucking like movie star, right? But yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Uh,
I also think there's just something to the just like the raw star power of Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, right? Like you have to
Battery
feature
low.
characters, right? These people. What would you put for like a Fincher movie? Think that there's like a Fincher movie in here?
I think there is, but I'm not familiar enough to like make that call.
My complicated, yeah, I have complicated. I love David Fincher so much. God, I love David Fincher so much. He has so many good movies, and I don't know which one I think I would want to put in. Um, like Seven is so. It's like, God, I there's just like all. It's it's Zodiac, Seven, The Social Network, and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I think I could make an argument for all of those basically.
Yeah,
Fight Club. Oh my god, I didn't even think about Fight Club.
Fight Club.
I
I
actually
think
kind of
it has to be
yeah,
Fight Club.
and it kind of has to be Fight Club to be honest.
Who do you like? Do you put Bond films in, and how many?
Oh, holy shit. I I think you just I think you it's one, you put one in and it's either Casino Royale or Skyfall. No other options.
Okay, you don't think there's any importance of like the older films,
I think no,
like
maybe you
like
could convince
Goldfinger?
me. No, absolutely not. I think that it's too far in the past. This is part of my like recency bias thing, right? Like, I just think it's too deep. Maybe you could. Sean Connery is a really important figure, but I would probably put in like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade before I put in a Bond movie featuring Connery's Bond, just because there's I think you can pick up essentially I'm thinking you can pick up Sean Connery as a side, somewhere along the line without having to invest in one of these really old Bond pictures that I actually really don't think makes a huge difference. If I had to pick one, it probably would be Goldfinger. Goldfinger was no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die, right?
Yeah,
Like that's like it's like a very classic sort of, thing that gets referenced, but like I don't know.
yeah. There's a bunch of like classic movies that I kind of like want to throw in here again that maybe get paired out later, but like Brazil, um, uh, uh, what's another good one in this kind of vein? Um, like this is a Terry Gilliam movie, right? Like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, right? Like, um, do you throw a network in, which is like a bit of a pull, but like also kind of culturally important? Um, uh, Network is the
Man.
uh, I never got around to this. Don't think I ever. Oh no, I did say Fifth Element. We talked about Chris Tucker, right? Um,
Oh
uh,
yeah, Chris Tucker, yeah. Fifth
uh,
Element is also interesting because Fifth Element has it has like a bunch of other
is Ruth Willis
like
as
reference.
Mila Jovovich or whatever her name is?
Yeah. I want to say Gene Hackman. It's not his fucking name. Who's the bad guy?
Oh,
But he's in everything.
Everyone, which is a different movie, but
Yeah.
actually, that's it. The professional, which is it's Gary Oldman.
Gary Oldman, yeah.
The professional Leon the Professional, which has
Natalie Portman.
yeah, I would say Natalie Portman and that French guy. That's important.
That's
Like
in everything, yeah.
yeah. What is his name? Um,
I don't know. He's in everything.
he was, funnily enough, every time I see him, it's like, oh, he's the French guy from Godzilla, from the American Godzilla movie, which is not Jean Reno.
Oh my god. How much do you think bad I mean maybe Zack Snyder is a good example. How much do you think like culturally maligned directors belong on the list? Do you put Michael Bay films on the list or
I think you put. I think you put
whatever Emmerich. What the fuck is his name? Was it
Roland.
Rupert Emmerich?
Roland.
Roland Emmerich. Yeah, because that Godzilla movie is a Roland Emmerich, right?
Yeah.
I guess he did Independence Day, and I do think I would want Independence Day.
Yeah. Do you put Sixth Sense? Right. You put a.
M. Night.
Yeah.
God, and Sixth Sense also gets you Bruce Willis. But the thing about Sixth Sense, I actually maybe wouldn't put Bruce, because part of it is that like you want to capture some of these actors playing their core roles, right? So for instance, I would put like the thing I was talking about, Seth Rogen, right? You want to put 40-Year-Old Virgin because it is Seth Rogen playing a stoner burnout making fart jokes, right? Which is like the Seth Rogen archetype, right? You wouldn't want to put Green Hornet on the list, which is Seth Rogen playing a superhero, because that's against type, right? And sure, yeah, it's cool that like comedic actors can be in movies against type, right? But like you put in Ace Ventura before you put in Eternal Sunshine, even if Eternal Sunshine is way better for this reason, right? Because Jim Carrey is a comedic actor, and you want him playing to type. You want to include him on type. And I think Bruce Willis Psychiatrist is off type for Bruce Willis. You want
yeah.
that
Also, right? I don't think you put in. I don't think you do Ace Ventura. I think you do Truman Show. But that's just
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I actually think that's a good question.
You could also just put in Sonic, right? Like
Liar. Yeah, Sonic also captures it. God, I can't believe you're trying to get me to put Sonic on the list.
I mean,
is it just because you have to have a video game movie?
I don't think it's because I have to, but it just like works, right? Like it gets good performances. It's got like a couple of actors in there, right? Like
yeah, I mean that's I kind of agree with you. Yeah.
Like I'm not gonna pitch Detective Pikachu, right? Like, but
that's also true. Yeah, I feel like Michael Bay has to be on the list, but I don't know what I would pick. It would be so hard. I like my baseline is Armageddon, right? This is the quintessential. I actually think I was gonna.
I mean, you could just do Transformers, right? Like.
I feel like Transformers doesn't make the list. Transformers is like Pirates. It's not good enough to like.
Yeah, but it's just like, but it's a moment, right? Like,
yeah, I know, I know,
right? It's a moment. It's like, it is like such a moment, right? It's Megan Fox, it's Shia LaBeouf, it's all these people that just like fell out of the universe, right? But like we're there for a moment.
Yeah. John Turturro's in that movie.
Get Michael Bay via Bad Boys 2.
Bad Boys 2's not bad. Will Smith, right?
Is that the Fiji water one?
What would you? What?
Is that the Fiji water one? Or what am I thinking of?
Maybe. I mean, it's the one with all the gay jokes. I don't know. You definitely have to have Will Smith in here somewhere. I feel like you have actually probably multiple Will Smith movies. I think he was the biggest movie star for 10 years. You know what I mean? You probably have some version of like Will Smith. You have Men in Black for sure. That's quintessential Will Smith, and it's quintessential Tommy Lee Jones. And it also just really captures it. You know what? Men in Black is the best version of this Santa Claus archetype that I'm talking about from the 90s, where it's like there's a there's a whole nother world with rules and world building that you never knew, with lore that you never like knew just under your, you know what I mean? That's like Men in Black is perfect for that.
Yeah. Apparently the Fiji Water movie is Double Take with Eddie Griffin, which is apparently a movie that I saw. I remember seeing this movie back when I was a kid, and I've misremembered it at Bad Boys 2, which maybe makes me racist, but yeah,
and I feel like I want to include another Will Smith movie, but there's not a lot of other ones that like work super well. Like I'm thinking, like I want something from Will Smith. Maybe honestly, just Men in Black is so good. That's so quintessential for him. It's just like the core of like, it's just the core of Will Smith. But I'm thinking about a movie like I Am Legend, I, Robot, right? Like this mid 2000s streak where Will Smith was just like in everything, and he was so fucking huge.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense. Like,
I guess. Oh man, though, but Independence Day.
I guess
if we're including Independence Day, you probably don't include Men in Black. I think I probably. Oh man.
I think you do include Men in Black. I think Men in Black's too important to not. Right?
You do Men in Black over Independence Day?
I think you do both. I think you can't avoid
Independent. You have to have a '90s disaster movie, right? Like that's what Independence Day is,
Yeah.
right? It's blowing up the White House with the laser, right?
Right.
Men in Black, I think is yeah.
In the chat, Rachel says, you seem to focus a lot on actors, directors, or any movies you would choose for something like cinematography, score, costume design, etc.
I would. You have to have but you would get these in other places,
Right.
but you would have to cover like Roger Deakins. You'd have to cover Hans Zimmer, right? And
Hans
probably
Zimmer,
a couple
John
of
Williams,
other.
you get easily, right? Like
Yeah, Hans Zimmer, John Williams. I would even go so far. I would probably name like
Danny Elfman. You needed Danny
Danny.
Elfman.
I was thinking like Danny Elfman. I was thinking Thomas Newman, who's like American Beauty. Do you know that? Do you know that movie? He's like
Vaguely.
plinky pianos. He's like he's got a very like legitimate style. You need Michael Giacchino, who you probably there's like a bunch of I would say that there's a bunch of composers who you want to hit on, but you would just pick them up kind of as you go, right?
Yeah, I mean, I I feel bad about this. It's my brother's cinematographer. The only cinematographer I have any real no attachment to is Roger Deakins. I just don't even
Yeah,
know.
I mean Roger Deakins you just get. The other one I'm thinking is Emmanuel Lubensky. He's the cinematographer who does all those. The thing about this is that I fucking hate these movies, but he is just a very influential cinematographer that you would pick up from something like Children of Men or Gravity or Birdman, right? Uh,
Yeah. Right. Well,
would you
we're
do Mad Max Fury Road?
maybe. I don't know. That's tough. Do you do any of the Mad Maxes that aren't Fury Road? Like,
I feel like you have to have Mel Gibson in there,
yeah.
but I don't know where I would find Mel Gibson. Maybe I would find Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon of all places. Because you get a lot with Lethal Weapon. Shane Black is oh my god,
Mr.
hello
Collins
visitor.
decided to make an
We're
appearance.
so deep in this. We're so deep in this that I realized that we're like in the back half. Do you wanna we've talked quite a lot about what the
Yeah,
list would theoretically look like. Wanna
this
call
is a
it
fertile topic for the future. Mr. Collins, who's your favorite cinematographer? What's your favorite movie? He likes watching the birds out the window.
That's a good movie. Oh my god, little visitor, yeah. You know what? Yeah, this is gonna be the thing. We'll keep this as an ongoing project. In the back
Yeah.
half, I will update you on what movies I've been checking off of the list, and you can berate me if I find some bad choices. Some of this is probably gonna be limited to like what I own or like what I have a streaming for. Because like I went through, I used to have all the stream. I canceled a bunch of them. Um and uh and so I'm not gonna have all of the streaming services to like find movies, but we're gonna kind of like do our best by like searching on Amazon Prime and HBO Max and stuff. I am keeping Amazon Prime for obvious reasons because Prime is just kind of like whatever, and I'm also keeping HBO Max because I think it's just the best of the streaming services and has the most stuff that I like passively want to be like
You're not
taking like
keeping
watching.
Netflix.
I'm probably not keeping Netflix. I kept Netflix for Rebel Moon, basically.
Yeah.
But now Rebel Moon is out, so I kind of don't have a reason to stick around. Unless Stranger Things is coming out, because I do want Stranger Things season 5. 2025. Yeah, I'll probably cancel Netflix. So, yeah.
Um. Yeah. So
Anyway, how was your week, buddy?
2 weeks at this point.
2 weeks, true.
Yeah. So actually, I can say this now. Speaking of cinematographers, my brother's premiere as a cinematographer, Ephus, is premiering at Directors Fortnight at Cannes. I'm extremely proud of him. If any of you happen to be going to Cannes, please check out Ephus. Whenever it gets distributed, I'll be sure to update people. Uh, I the director's name is Carson Lund. He's a New England native. It was shot in Douglas, Massachusetts. Um, uh, I you know, I'm very proud of my brother. I just wanted to share that with the small audience that this podcast reaches. Yeah, oh yeah, just in case anyone just so happens to be going to Cannes. I mean, you never know, right? Like maybe there's somebody in France who's like, "What is this? Some derps talking about games?" Right? Like it happens to like live in Cannes. um. But there's that. What else has happened in my life? I've been playing. Oh, I finally got to Phantom Liberty in Cyberpunk. Um,
Nice.
and everybody said how great it was. I think it's good, but like so far, it's just been kind of like a bunch of big set pieces, which is fine. Just like not particularly impressive to me. I have not unlocked or I have not gotten to the Idris Elba character yet. I am hot on the tail of that, so probably soon. Um, I have mostly fallen off of Dragon's Dogma for the moment, um, just because I wanted to finish Cyberpunk. I've been
You picked
playing.
up Taiwan, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
We can talk about man. We can talk about fucking strategies for getting Taiwan if you want to. How far along are you? Are you going to get Taiwan?
I've been working through the Forbidden Reach, so I did Scroll Hunter, which
Did,
honestly went very quick for me. I did that in like 2 hours,
did you
basically.
use the thing I told you to do?
Yeah, where you just like sit on the thing. I bought maybe like 10 of them or something. I bought a bunch of them.
Yeah, so
And
for those of you at home that don't know, just in case you're wondering, you would like to get Taiwan. The way you do
yeah.
this is there is a scroll that increases the drop rate of, or no, there's a buff that increases the drop rate of scrolls, but it disappears after you loot a scroll. But it only disappears after you loot it. So what you do is you find a group that's farming, because there will be a group farming, and you go to, I believe it's like the frozen, or it's not called the frozen throne, it's called like the frozen something or other.
Yeah, like the Frozen Vault or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
The Froststone Vault, I think is what
Froststone
it
Vault,
is.
yeah. And you sit there and you farm for like 5 to 10 minutes, and then you loot, and then then the buff goes away, but the drop rate stayed increased. So you'll loot like 5, 10 scrolls. Like Buddy says, you can get away with a relatively low number of them. I also recommend doing this one early because you also pick up a shit ton of keys, which are important for clearing your Vault Buster, which is the other Forbidden Reach one.
Yeah, so I've also been doing that. The other thing that I
Real
was doing in
quick,
Forbidden Oh, sure.
just one more tip for people: when you are doing the scrolls, right, what you do is you take all the scrolls of one type, you activate 5 of them. That'll put 5 trees on your map. That's the max. Then you go to one, you loot one, and then you burn out those scrolls because it will always spawn right in front of you. It will save you a ton of time having to fly around the map. Sorry, continue.
Oh, I didn't do that. But that's actually really clever.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then the thing now I have to do Forbidden Reach is I have to do rares. There's all these rares that like I hadn't looked it up and I didn't know why they weren't spawning, but now I understand that they're tied to professions. Um and so I need to spawn and farm those Forbidden Reach rares, and I need to do more vault stuff. But I'm otherwise pretty much done with the vault. I did all of the treasures. I did all of like the other sort of or the Forbidden Reach. The other thing I've been doing is just kind of like farming the elemental storms when they pop up. I feel like that's just one that you kind of have to it takes
yeah,
a while and you have to find the time for it, and I've been slowly looking for the time for it basically. I quite like the what would I call it, the ritual of like logging on and checking, flying around and doing stuff. Though obviously I was like gone all weekend, so I didn't do any of the stuff this weekend. But yeah, it's just like it's like mindlessly killing stuff for a couple of hours is actually a pretty good time, and I've sort of been like waiting for like WoW to give me the impetus. And then we also entered season 4, which you missed, the our kind of opening to season 4. Um, but we went back to Vault of the Incarnates and we
I
played
was
through
there.
Vault of the
I did
Incarnates.
not miss that.
Oh, wait, really? What
Yeah,
was I thinking? Whatever, you didn't miss it. Oh, maybe you missed like our like last Farak kill.
no,
Our
I
AOTC
missed
Farak kill with
the time
Shiz.
walking thing. I was there for the Shiz kill as well.
Oh
Um,
man, I don't know why. Okay, well, you know what?
yeah,
Whatever. You're there. Okay, buddy. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, we did Vault of the Incarnates, and which was pretty fun. I was a big fan of going back to
yeah.
that. I've done a couple of Mythic Plus keys, but my intention is to go pretty light on season 4. I want to get all of the portals because I have some of them, but not all of them, and I want to get Keystone Hero by kind of like pushing up, again. But I'm not going super crazy on keys because I really want to do the Myths of Pandaria remix out. That's the thing I like want to go hard on.
Yeah, I'm thinking
Also, I'm insanely total war brained, so that's like the other thing that's like getting into my brain. But anyway, I interrupted your so you can
Yeah,
keep
yeah,
going.
no. I mean, that's totally fine. I'm also excited for Pandaria, right? Like, it's funny. I heard you and somebody else in the guild talking about rolling monks. Is like, well, I might roll something that isn't a monk for like the first time in a long time. Because especially since it'll roll forward into the next expansion. But what was I gonna say? Otherwise, I've been playing some Street Fighter, right? Like my boy Zangief. I've been holding pretty steady at like Plat 4, but I've been learning stuff, so I feel good about that. Just today they dropped the trailer for Akuma.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah,
Classic.
he looks great, but like the joke is that Akuma is always overpowered. Like he always drops overpowered. He's usually pretty high tier. The interesting thing is he's dropping on May 22nd along with a balance, like a real balance patch. So that'll be interesting to see it, like, because Zangief and Lily and Manon, the grapplers, are largely seen to be on the bottom tier. So it'll be interesting to see if we get any buffs on them and if my life gets any easier. Also, who are the impressive characters? Like Ken, maybe. This is also this is one of these things that we used to talk to a lot about League of Legends, right? Like, there are characters that are oppressive at like low levels, characters that are oppressive at mid levels, and characters that are oppressive at high levels. And I believe Ken's pretty strong at both mid and high levels. He's just got like relatively easy combo execution. And can shit out a ton of damage. At like low levels, I'd say this is E Honda, right? Like he is he kind of he just, if you don't know how to deal with some of his stuff, you just kind of die. Something that's interesting is that I guess because fighting games is kind of genre skews a little bit more hardcore, also the cast is a little bit smaller. Devs don't tend to care about balancing for the lower end, right? Like we used to talk about how like you can never make Master Yi very strong because he's just too much of like a pub stomp hero, right? Or a low tier killer. And so making him good in like higher level play will just make him unbearable in low level play, and so you can't do that. But that doesn't seem to affect fighting games as much. I think, like I said, partially because people don't care. Like there's kind of a get good scrub mentality, which I think is mostly positive. And then and the other half of that is also there's just not the space for it, right? Like you can't dedicate like 10% of your roster to a noob character, or like a solely a noob stomp character, if that makes sense. What else? Otherwise, things I've been. Well, let me see. Still occasionally pop into Balatro. Yeah. Is there anything else on my list? On like my upcoming list? I don't know. I've been watching stuff. I haven't been watching. I would not a ton of like crazy stuff. The playtest for Commander and Guardian just came out today for Pathfinder 2e. Read over those. Those are neat. What about you, buddy? And I finished the 4th Terry Pratchett book, Sorcery, today, which is good.
Oh, okay.
I love Discworld.
I have a crazy thing I want to talk about, which is, so I went to this cabin in the woods, friend of mine, bachelor party. And the idea was we just all wanted to get together and hang out in this and be a bunch of stuff. And I ended up playing 2 games of a board game called Root. Have you ever heard of this board game?
ROOT?
ROOT.
I think I've heard. Is it like the colorful letters?
Yeah, and it's the colorful letters, and it's all like woodland. It's like little woodland creatures, right? So you're playing cats and mice and rats and otters and all this other sort of stuff.
I've heard of it, but I haven't played it.
Okay, so Root is a board game. I played 2 rounds of it, and I don't want to say I'm obsessed with it because I'm not obsessed with it, but it was very fun, and I want to talk a little bit about that. It was interesting. I actually won my very first, even though at the time it looked like I theoretically had sort of lost. So the first game of Root I played, my friends recommended that I play the Otters, who are the trading consortium of Root. Otters play with a hand of public cards, and anyone can buy cards from the Otters. in order to like pick up power, essentially, like kind of like for themselves or whatever. I quite liked my time playing the otters, and I just kind of saw a lateral opportunity that everybody else did, and I sprinted ahead. I got to And Root is a game of asymmetric sort of victory, right? So you have four factions on the map. They are all looking to do relatively different things, right? Some things that are straightforward, like aggressive things, some things that are like industrial, building buildings and stuff like that. But some things that are whatever, like different. But one of the things that's true is you always get victory points for cardboard. So taking cardboard squares off the map, you get victory for that. And the other thing that you get victory points for are like crafting items and stuff like that. And the interesting thing about the otters is the otters don't have good, reliable way to farm victory points that the other factions do, because it's just pretty dangerous to sort of like do that. But I took advantage of an opportunity. I sprinted way ahead, and at the time at the table, it was funny because the whole table, when somebody is that close to winning, the whole table essentially rallied to another friend of mine, and they empowered him to win the game. And then we only later realized that we hadn't played the rules right, and he actually didn't win the game, and I still won the game, essentially, right? And then I played again, and I did awfully in my second game because I played a sort of a faction that I misunderstood the mechanics. I really didn't vibe with it. Didn't really like kind of connect with me. Big fan of sort of Root, and I think that there's quite a lot kind of going on there. But you and I have talked about board games in the past, right? We've talked about sort of the PvE, PvP aspect of board games, right? Like Arkham Horror is not an insanely fun game to play because at a certain point it becomes clockwork, where one person is essentially playing everybody's turn because they see the
solution.
5D chess of how to win. Yeah, they see the solution. You have essentially kind of reached the sort of like terminus. But yeah, I was interested if you had ever played it, or you would. This is a fundamentally PvP game, but like everybody is playing a different version of the game and has like different stuff that they are going towards to win, essentially.
No, I haven't played it, but I've seen it, and that sounds very cool. I'll have to give it a look see. Um,
It is the kind of thing. I'm not making this promise because it would whatever, like $200 or something to buy all of it. But it's the kind of thing that I theoretically want to buy all it and all of the expansions or whatever, because I played like the complete version that had everything, right? And like with a big group, we played with a 7-person table, which is huge, obviously. And that was so much fun. I had a great time with it. But it is the kind of thing that you could definitely make like a Saturday activity out of that would be super fun. You get a bunch of people, you get whatever you set aside 3 to, I don't know, whatever, 5 hours in order to play through the whole thing, and you can kind of do that. It has a lot of the same fun as a good command. Honestly. There's a lot of politics and alliance making, and I'll trade me that kind of stuff. Making deals on the table. That's
Charging battery.
Anyway, that was like the big thing I wanted to talk about. I've been playing a lot of video games. I've been playing a lot of Battlegrounds. Battlegrounds Duos came out, and I've been playing Duos, which is pretty fun. Duos is where normal Battlegrounds is 8-person free for all. Duos is 2v2v2v2. So four team, four 2-person team free for all. Is the saucy low battery woman manga set?
oh yeah, yes. Sorry, I didn't realize you guys could hear that. This is why I plugged my headset in.
I appreciate that she's saucy.
Yeah. Uh, I'm so sorry. I thought that was a hardware thing and it only played in my headset. Otherwise, I would have made sure it didn't happen. But thank you for calling that out. Hopefully the people at home, I don't think they will hear it because it will be. I don't think it's not on my microphone, so it won't pick up. But yes, my headset warned me that the battery was low. And you were cutting out, so that's why I plugged in because.
Okay, yeah. Listen, the folks at home, listen to my amazing, hot takes on. I don't even remember what I was discussing. Battlegrounds duos, right? The duos process is super fun, right? Because it has some of the same. And
which game is this? Sorry.
So this is Hearthstone Battlegrounds, right? Auto Battler, right? TFT,
right?
Type game. But you can essentially play on a 2-person team. right? Where you are both picking up minions, but you can also trade minions between hands, right? And it's really fascinating to see sort of the meta of Battlegrounds kind of developing. I have lost a lot of games, but I've also won a couple of games. I've gotten first place twice. And part of that was that like the two-person nature of it means that you can have a one player who pops off and goes really hard, and you can have one player who's sort of supporting that player, which I think is pretty interesting. And then you can also do stuff like you have somebody who is sort of tempo oriented going for the early game, and somebody who's sort of value oriented going for the game, right? Where you have somebody who's like trying to win on his powerful early game team while your friend is like building up a big scaling composition that's just gonna like scale to fucking, you know, the moon essentially. So yeah, I've been having a pretty good time with that. I think it's I don't know. I think it's neat. And yeah, and then the last thing is that I've also been very Total War pilled in that way that ruins me for Total War, where I've just been obsessed with the upcoming content in the next DLC pack, which drops tomorrow, called Thrones of Decay. And so I've just been playing the game in my free time because I want to play the new content, but the new content isn't fucking out yet. I am very excited for the new content, especially it seems as though it is looking towards being a huge sort of like return to force. This is the Dragonflight to Shadow of Changes, which is the previous DLC, Shadow of Changes sort of Shadow, where it felt like the Total War team wasn't delivering on the promise of Warhammer, this sort of stuff. But the interesting thing about Total War right now is there are rumors of that there are two Total War games that are going to be the next two Total War games are coming out. One is World War One, which I think is a really fascinating concept. There's two sort of versions that people have sort of been pitching. One of them is sort of an Empire Total War that ends in it's an Empire Total War that ends with World War One, right? Where essentially you're playing kind of the late 1800s into sort of like World War One, back end of sort of the technology tree. But then the other thing is 40K, is that after kind of the completion of Warhammer, Warhammer 3, they're going to move to 40K, and another trilogy, just like for Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And the trilogy for 40K would be starting in 2025, 2026 kind of like timescale, which I think is pretty neat, even if it's wildly different. 40K I think is much harder to adapt to the Total War formula than Warhammer kind of is, and will change. It will really kind of like demand some kind of like changes to the core functionality.
Yeah, I feel like if you, I feel like if you do 40K, you have to limit the scope, right? It has to be like on a planet or something, right? Like, and then you can just kind of like run the armies as like the Battlefield game, right? Like, I don't think you can do like a full like space empire fight, right? Like,
I feel like you can. I feel like that's what's going to end up happening. It's going to be the full space empire. And the idea is that when you go to a planet, when you land on a planet, it'll be, you know, whatever, like say Chaos Space Marines versus Space Marines kind of thing, right? You will fight a battle on the planet that will be emblematic of planet-wide sort of
I see that.
siege, right? And that's probably how I would handle it. This is how a couple of maybe years ago at this point, there was a Total War content creator who pitched a World War II Total War game, which I was very into this. But one of the things he kind of talked about is that like in current Total War, everything is very one-to-one, which is like when you build an army, your army has this many guys and they do this much damage, and it's like this many people like fighting or whatever. But like World War II was really sort of a a war that was less about sort of discrete individual troops and more about the ebb and flow of kind of like fronts or whatever. And Hearts of Iron captures that really, right? But something you could do is sort of like, instead of, you would have the Hearts of Iron kind of top end, and then you would drop down into real-time battles that are sort of emblematic of, are you pushing, are you falling back kind of thing, right? Are you winning the Battle of the Bulge, or are you losing, right? that kind of stuff, which I think is pretty interesting. And I would be down to kind of get to the bottom of it.
That makes sense. Question for you about board games, actually.
What's up?
Have you ever played Scythe or Wingspan?
I have played Scythe. I played Scythe with you.
Oh, right. Okay.
I love Scythe. Scythe actually is quite a lot like Root,
Okay.
interestingly enough. Root is actually sort of Scythe on steroids. The thing that I liked about Scythe was the asymmetry of there's a bunch of different win conditions, and you can win by doing this or that or this or that. And technically speaking, Root functions the same way because it's tracking victory points, so it's all on one track, but there's a bunch of different ways you can get victory points. You can get victory points by crafting items. You can get victory points by it's called wiping cardboard, right? Like destroying buildings and stuff off the map, that kind of stuff. Scythe also sort of had something along those lines, which I think is interesting. Yeah.
No.
Scythe also has had a bunch of expansions at this point, right?
Yeah. It's funny. I looked up Stonemaier Games to know that the publisher, because like I played Wingspan with some friends of friends, and I thought that was a super fun game. But apparently they've come out with Wormspan, which is Wingspan for dragons, which is very interesting to me.
Whoa, that's cool.
Yeah, so I really like Wingspan because it's kind of it's kind of like well, how do I want to put it? It's got very cool kind of like interconnected mechanics, but it's also kind of like it is a versus game, but like it's not a thing where you directly interact with your opponents a lot, right? It's about like building your own engine, and like the interactions are kind of like how to keep, how do you play versus how do they play, which is interesting to me. But yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, I'm now reading about like Scythe stuff. Scythe has added new factions. They've also like made bigger I guess I don't even know what you call them, sort of bigger maps, so you can play like 7-player, which is pretty wind again. Oh, it adds airships. Very cool. Okay, well, awesome.
Oh, that's right. Root has a role-playing game. I knew I had seen it somewhere for some reason.
Oh yeah. One of the interesting things about Root is one of the interesting things about Root is there's a character called the Vagabond, which is a faction, but it's actually just a solo guy. You don't have like an army, you don't have like faction mechanics, you just kind of have like, so that person is sort of just like playing like
Cool.
which I think is pretty neat.
How many expansions does Root have?
3, but there's technically a 4th expansion that automates some of the factions so that you can play because like the recommendation is to play 4, so you can go all the way up for 8.
Is that the Clockwork expansion?
Yeah, the Clockwork mechanizes the base 4 factions so that if you're only playing 2 people, you can have 2 automated factions that fill out the board better, so you're not like in a kind of like a shitty 1v1 territory.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
I think that's that.
All right. Well, if you'd like to email us about any of the things we talked about in this podcast, you can email us at derpsplaygames.com. You can watch us live at twitch.tv/derpsplaygames. Twitch.tv/derpsplaygames or youtube.com/derpsplaygames. Where these go out live. As you can tell, we love to interact with our audience as he goes to check to make sure no one's chatted in YouTube. No one has ever chatted in YouTube. Be the first. I'll shout you out. What else? Rate, review us on iTunes or wherever you find podcasts. All the links are down in the description. Buddy, you have anything else you're looking to promote?
I am looking to promote something. Cryptmaster comes out next week.
Ooh.
On May 9th is the release of Cryptmaster. I'm very excited for this. Maybe Cryptmaster would be a good episode actually. Sort of like Estrella, but I don't know. You can obviously play a bunch of it and see how you enjoy things. So yeah.
Yeah. Sounds fantastic. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to say until next time to your listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.